Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of Alluvionic's CMMC webinar series. We are glad to have so many of you tuning in today as we talk CMMC, but specifically start to dig into some changes to our clauses that we're used to seeing in our contracts. So there's some interesting things to cover today. Of course, we will also touch on some of the basics related to CMMC because those are always important. But our context really will be about some of these changes to the DFARS clauses. I know we have people that will likely continue to pop in here over the next couple of minutes as we get started. But I want to be respectful of everyone's time and get us moving forward quickly. So today we will have some quick introductions so that you can meet our panelists, of course, and you'll know who you're listening to and what their backgrounds are. And we are going to have a panel discussion that's moderated. So I will be your moderator today. We will talk through these DFARS clauses, and we will have time for question and answer. I do want to, just from a logistical standpoint, direct you to a little familiarity with our tool that we're using today. We're using Microsoft Teams. If you look up in the top, there is a Q&A feature. So please feel free as thoughts arise to post your questions in that Q&A feature. I will try to keep an eye on it throughout, but if I do miss it in real time, we will catch up to it at the conclusion so that we can get those questions answered. And if for some reason we do run out of time, we'll monitor and we will respond back to you because we definitely want to get you as many answers as we can so that you've got the ability to move forward confidently with these changes within our CMMC ecosystem. And we will conclude with the panelist contact information. Always want to have an open door for you to reach out and get more information as you see fit. So to get started, today, I mentioned I'll be your moderator. I'm Lizzie High. I oversee the commercial services here at Alluvionic, and I am joined by two experts in the CMMC ecosystem. I will start with our guest, Eric. Would you please just do a quick introduction, Eric?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Eric Levitas. I am the VP of Business Development at Control Case. We are one of the few C3 PAOs, and we audit and certify against a bunch of different frameworks. So I dream about compliance. I dream about CMMC. Very excited to be here and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I'm also joined by one of my colleagues, Bobby Padilla, who leads our CMMC execution here at Alluvionic. Bobby, would you also do an introduction?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining today. As Lizzie stated, I'm Bobby Padilla. I serve as the Information Security Director at Alluvionic, and I, most importantly, I also oversee our CMMC compliance services team, where we help organizations like yourselves navigate the CMMC compliance journeys that you have, and help those clients prepare for those CMMC requirements. I've been with Alluvionic for over 5 years now. I'm also a certified CMMC professional. And prior to joining Alluvionic, I served 25 years in the United States Air Force in a variety of various IT and cybersecurity roles. Looking forward to today's discussion and happy to answer any questions you have along the way. Nice to meet everyone.
Thank you so much. So from an ecosystem standpoint, we have Alluvionic as a registered practitioner organization within the cyber AV. So we're on that readiness side for CMMC, and then we have control case on the assessment side, so the certification side. So bringing a couple different perspectives as we dig into this topic. So keep that in mind as you think of those burning questions. And like I said, please go ahead and put any of your questions up into that Q&A box. So getting started here. The purpose of our discussion today is there has been an overhaul of our FAR and DFARS clauses, and it likely happened without most of you noticing. So this was some sort of breaking news earlier last month, February 1st, this came out. So we wanted to bring this topic forward to help clarify what has changed, what has stayed the same. Some things are going to disappear, what it really means right now. Where did the basic self-assessment go? Is that a thing of the past for real? We want you to understand what you're going to be facing moving forward. We want to understand kind of what the assessors think from a C3PAO standpoint. And we also want to leave you with some things that you should be thinking about how to stay compliant. We don't want you to overreact to anything. We also don't want you to underreact to anything. So we'll start with just taking a look at what changed. And I'll start with Bobby over here to start unpacking some of these clauses and kind of just help us set the stage for what's going on.
Yeah, thanks, Lizzie. So yeah, so namely, is kind of the title of our webinar today is the 252 204 7019 excuse me, and 7020 clauses, right? Is kind of the focus of today. And so the 7019, as indicated, kind of the lower left-hand part of the slide, that DFARS clause has been primarily eliminated due to the CMMC requirements. So that was, as a reminder, that was the requirement to self-attest to the NIST 800-171 requirements and then produce what's referred to as an SPRS score. So that score, again, ranging from a negative 203 to a perfect score of a 110. That was a requirement to be entered into the supplier performance risk system on an annual basis, oftentimes required perhaps by your prime contractor. So that was to remain compliant with the 7019 clause. That is, in essence, has been eliminated since February 1st of this year. And then the other important clause is the 252-204-7020, which is just undergoing a renumbering. So as you see, they're indicated on the slide. It's now been renumbered to 252-240-7997, and that is the clause that requires a medium or high. You are subject to a medium or high assessment by the DFCAC. So again, that one is still going to exist, but it's just been renumbered. So you eventually will start to see a change in the 7020 language. We'll probably talk a little bit more about that today. It's not going to be immediate, certainly, as existing contracts may exist with the 7019 and 7020 clause. But those are the two notable DFARS clause changes. And then over to the right side is the FAR clause, which is required for federal contract information, the 15 security controls that was labeled 52-204-21. That one is also going through a numbering change to the 52-240-93. And what has not changed and still remains active is the primary requirements for CMMC is what we know today. The original DFARS 252-204-7812, which again implements the safeguarding of controlled unclassified information, the implementation of the NIST 800-171 Alpha Revision 2, having a documented system security plan and a plan of action of milestones for any deficiencies, and as well as the 7021 and 7025 clauses, notably 7021, everyone is now familiar with that. That's the new clause that can go into contracts that requires the CMMC level 1 or 2 certification. So it's kind of a summary of the changes. I think we'll probably get more into those shortly. So.
Yeah. So a couple things on these changes. So I'm going to start with the FAR clause. So FAR clause, this has been in contracts for lots of years, lots and lots of years. And because it's a FAR clause versus a DFARS clause, this is going to impact a larger population of contractors, correct? So we're looking at a clause here. In terms of this, it's just a renumbering, but I think it's important to underscore, I know we talk to customers all the time, Eric, I'm sure you do, I know Bobby does, that they'll sort of quantify the amount of business I do with the government versus the defense business that I do. This FAR clause is relevant where? Who all is impacted in terms of FAR and these basic cybersecurity requirements for FCI, which is level 1.
Yeah, I'll jump in there, right? I mean, look, we've been talking about this for a while. We always, you hit the nail on the head. Everybody goes, I'm just going to get out of the DoD. And it's like, well, okay. I mean, if that's what you're thinking about doing, if it doesn't meet the muster of investing in CMMC, fine. But do you do business with the government as a whole, and do you handle this information? Well, it's like, oh yeah, but that's the rest of our business. It's like, well, look, this probably doesn't make sense. You need to look at the larger picture, right? So this FAR clause and it's just shifting numbers doesn't change the fact that this is getting government wide, right? It's going to affect all these different agencies based on the information that you handle. DoD was kind of a placeholder and like a starting point, and basically telling people, hey, you better have your act in order, right? And now it's going to start to spread. So, how and what that looks like, is TBD. And, Bobby, if you know more, please. But I just think, as a company, you need to make conscious decisions from a business development perspective. If you do business with the government at any capacity and you handle this type of information, start talking about it now so that you can invest. So just like with CMMC, when everybody was like, oh my God, like, I'm not ready for this. Well, 7019 kind of was like, well, you kind of been telling us you've been ready for this and you're not, and that's okay. That's why CMMC got in place, because we want to make sure you're actually doing what you're saying you're doing. Same thing here, right? It's like, if you have business, get prepared now and start preparing for this business that's going to be affected, that's going to be FAR driven instead of just DFARS driven. Bobby, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that, but this is definitely a business development decision at its core.
Yeah, no, I think just kind of reiterating what both of you said, that the FAR clause extends beyond the federal acquisition regulation. It extends beyond just the Department of Defense, Department of War. That the other DFARS clauses that I recognized earlier. So that one is, as you said, if you don't want to necessarily do business with the Department of War, if you're doing business with the federal government, you're gonna have to comply with at least those basic 15 foundational cybersecurity requirements.
Right. So that's the starting point. So that's CMMC level 1. It's a subset of the full. And we're seeing here, government is certainly not abandoning or stepping away. They're investing in this process of renumbering it. So they're sort of doubling down. So I think it's just an indication. It's going to be taken more seriously across the federal government. And they started, again, Eric indicated, they started kind of with, let's let the Department of Defense, Department of War figure this out first. And chances are we're going to see a little bit more broad adoption there. I also want to look at 7020. So again, that's another one that's interestingly being renumbered. 7020 was the requirement that talked about the basic assessment, the medium assessment, the high assessment. So what we see in terms of the change here is this self-assessment language going away, this basic self-assessment language going away. But we do recognize there's still going to be this high assessment out there. And I think it's important for companies to understand what the high assessment is, who does that work, how does that happen? So this could appear in your contract, and who's executing those high assessments, and what have you seen where companies have had a high assessment that was executed for that organization? I know, Bobby, you had an experience with a customer here not too long ago.
Yeah. So again, that is the requirement that you're subject to audit / assessment, right? So not the CMMC certified third party assessment, 7021 requirements, but basically it was kind of the mechanism. It will remain the mechanism that the Department of Defense, Department of War, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center has a government agency. They have a number of assessors that work this clause and this assessment process. They're basically checking on the defense contractors, right, on their compliance previously to the 7012, 7019, ensuring that they are complying with the implementation of the NIST 800-171 Alpha Revision 2. And that was the mechanism for them to randomly audit companies. Certainly they're not staffed to assess and audit every defense contractor, hence why the CMMC ecosystem has third-party assessment organizations now. But yeah, I personally have seen that a contractor that was really positioning themselves they were pursuing CMMC level 2 certification. They didn't have an assessment scheduled or anything like that, but they got notified by the DFARS that they were going to come on site and they were going to be assessed under the 7020 requirements, and their experience wasn't so great. So it was an eye opener for them. They did not, the way that they had been implementing the 800-171 was not in line with the requirements. So it was an indicator that they must comply, and at some point it would have probably come out as well, as they would have pursued level 2 certification. It's probably a different topic for a webinar as far as what C3PAOs are seeing with clients who feel they're ready for assessment, and oftentimes they're turned away. So this is kind of an example of a government agency that assessed them using the DFARS 7020 clause.
Right. Yeah, thank you. So 7020, although it's renumbered, still out there. There still is a mechanism for DFARS, that Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center, to audit companies through this process if this clause appears in your contract. So just important to know, still important, still matters, still impacts there. Eric, I don't know if you have any insights on DFARS audits or the like. I know DFARS actually that's how, as a C3PAO, when you go through the process initially, you're going to face that DFARS audit in order to certify you.
Yeah, I mean, look, the DFARS is the DFARS, right? So we tell everybody, to Bobby's point, it's random, expected to be tough. They come with their own personalities, their own expectations, but at the bottom, bottom line is they're there to assess you're doing what you're saying you're doing. And that's the same as a C3PO. It's like, we're just assessing you're saying what you're doing. So doesn't go away, doesn't shift. A lot of people just see this numbering changing system and they're like, oh, thank God this is gone. It's like not the case. I think, to double down on what you said earlier, it's like they're if anything, they're making this more formalized. They're getting this in stone, and they're trying to make this a standard that is going to be, actually followed. So I would say, at the end of the day, just be prepared to be able to do what you're saying you're doing, and come prepared. I've probably had, I don't know, 5 or 6 clients that have been through a DFARS or DFARS high assessment. Every single one of them said, boy, this was scary. It was random. It came out of nowhere. And we had very little time to prepare, because they kind of expect you to be prepared. You said you were prepared. There's not a we start now type of situation. So yeah, just stay ahead of it. And again, I think all of this is, there are no shortcuts. You cannot shortcut this, and they're trying to double check that. So yeah, when we went through it, I mean, it's a totally different, maybe not, but totally different experience. We got into a queue and they were like, you got 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks. You got to get assessed. And we're like, 2 weeks, but we're ready, right? So it was a very interesting experience, but we did it, and a certain number of you guys will be subject to that. So yeah, very interesting clause specific to the DFARS, and they're very interesting folks. But at the end of the day, they're there to do a job, and you're there to show them that you're compliant.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And you all here today, you're trying. You're trying to learn. You're trying to stay ahead of it. So keep that effort up, because again, if you face this, you want to be as prepared as you possibly can. Not only do you get very short notice that they're coming, but also when they have findings, there's a very short runway that they expect you to respond back to any findings that come your way. So just one to watch for sure. Stay on top of that one. I also want to dig in a little more to our eliminated clause, 7019. So when we think 7019, a lot of what we think about is an SPRS score. very common language. We hear it, we talk about it all the time. And the supplier performance risk system is where that score, of course, is being posted and generated right now with 7019. So let's talk a little bit about the supplier performance risk system and what happens to it now. If we no longer have a SPRS score to input for 7019, what in the world will SPRS become? So can we talk a little bit about how SPRS is going to be used moving forward? Anyone like to start?
Yeah, I think I can start, and then I think Eric can kind of talk about what may happen from a C3 PAO successful level 2 certification. What occurs there from after a successful assessment. So primarily, again, in the past, you needed to have a score. You needed to post a score. It did not have to be necessarily a perfect 110, because if you had a poem, so it was obviously very. It was very observed by your prime contractors. They wanted to kind of know how you're doing in your compliance journey. Again, there was no third-party certification requirements prior to that. So it was really just important to have a score. Oftentimes, there was probably some overinflation that was occurring, but that was a requirement. So you would go into the supplier performance risk system and update your score. Well, I believe now that since it's been eliminated, the focus is no longer what is your score. The focus is, are you meeting all the requirements for CMMC level 1 or level 2, which is what the requirements are to date. In fact, I know we're now in the first year of phase 1. So all defense contractors, whether you have a level 1 or level 2 requirement, you must by November 10th of 2026 or sooner, if you're being directed by your prime contractor, you must go into the SPRS system and affirm your compliance to one of those two, level 1 or level 2. So the score itself is not relevant anymore. Of course, the relevancy of a perfect 110, it's still relevant that means you have fully implemented everything. But the reporting mechanism of where to update the score in SPRS, I believe, has now been removed, and now the attention is more in line with the CMMC compliance of level 1 or level 2 affirmation. And of course, in this first year, it can be self-attested if you do not have a third-party assessment. And then I think maybe Eric can talk about what happens once control case provides you a successful certification, and then what happens behind the scenes for the system for the client at that point, or for the OSC at that point.
Yeah, so remember, and I think this clause going away is interesting because a lot of the conversations I have is, all is okay. I'm just gonna self-certify and we'll be good to go. I'm just gonna put this thing on the back burner, right? The biggest thing that's shifting now is validated compliance, right? So at the end of the day, it's having a C3PO come in and say, are you in fact a 110 out of 110? And can we upload that into EMAS? And once that process is uploaded into EMAS, then you can confirm you are in fact CMMC compliant. So I think the biggest thing here is this is kind of what we've been talking about in industry for a while is, again, prepare to be perfect, prepare for an assessment, prepare for a third party to come in and validate perfection. There is no such thing as this, most people are gearing up towards, they hear this 88 score, they hear this, I could be, I could do this whole song and dance with not being perfect. Assume that you need to come to a C3PAO because we need to now upload you into EMAS, and by you being uploaded into EMAS, you will have a compliant score. And then I actually don't know, and Bobby, if you do know, like I get asked a lot, is like, well, once we upload that into EMAS, whether it's, because remember, there's 3 deliverables that come out of an audit: certification, failure, or conditional certification, right? So there are 3, there's, not every certification ends with a certification, unfortunately. I guess there's a 4th path. You could false start, right? You're not even ready for the assessment. But once we begin that assessment and we upload everything into EMAS on your behalf, we have no choice but to either put pass, fail, or conditionally pass. We get asked a lot. It's like, I don't know how contractors are going to take that information, right? What if you show that you're not compliant? Are they going to say that's okay? It's your first dry run, no issues? Or are they going to dictate you working with you as a partner or not? We don't know. So I would say, my feedback to this and kind of the C3PO's role in all of this is like, again, now you got to meet your maker. We don't go away. If anything, we get a little bit more important into the process. And, we're uploading all that information to EMAS, pass, fail, or conditionally pass. So, make sure you're doing your due diligence beforehand. We do a lot of mock assessments before assessments because, again, once we begin that assessment, you have 3 deliverables that get uploaded into that EMAS system. And again, you want that only to be pass. We don't think you want that to show conditionally pass or fail. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that. Bobby, I didn't know if you had any feedback on what you're hearing from government contractors on how they're taking that information once that information is uploaded by a C3PAO, good, bad, or indifferent. But that's an ever-going topic that I'm having with my clients of, are you willing to take that risk?
Yeah, I would say from an SPRS standpoint, the interface has changed in SPRS, and for any of the audience out there that's been in there recently, so it used to be that you had a place to go in and post your score for the 7019 requirements. Now there's an opportunity for your level 1 self-attestation for you to go in there and post that. There's an opportunity for level 2 self-attestation. And then the third opportunity that's where the EMAS, I think it kind of auto feeds in there for you to demonstrate that you've got the level 2s certified. So there's a few different tabs within the interface for the SPRS system now. And presently, the 7019 post your own score thing still is there. I don't know what the actual timeline will be to pull that out, or at least last time we looked. So may or may not still be there, but there's absolutely a shift in what's shown. And I know, so we're a defense contractor in our own right here at Alluvionics. Another part of our business is defense contractors. We're CMMC level 2 certified ourselves. And I know that internally we get asked, hey, can we get a screenshot of that? So sometimes it's your prime contractor and they want to see a screenshot of what you have in the SPRS system to validate that you, of course, do have whatever it is that you're explaining to them that you have in place. So I think right now that's what they're asking for and what they want to see. Obviously, we're all learning this together. This is all still very new. So there's a lot of things that will firm up over time. But that's what we're seeing kind of right now from what's requested of us to validate where we are in this. There was some good conversation here about, Eric, you said score of 88, etc. As we're in this period right now where we are in that self-attestation requirement, we've similarly heard things from customers that are seeking to get compliant. They're on track and they're working towards it. And again, they want to go and post a score. And I think they are thinking of what they've done in the past with 7019. But this has kind of come up in the past with the conditional certification that you can get when you have a formal certified third party come in. You are able to have a few POAMs, and there's restrictions to that, and not every control is eligible for a POAM. But when you're looking at that self-attestation, are we expecting that we have a perfect 110? If we're going to say that we have a perfect 110, that's definitely a question I feel like we hear from companies often.
Yeah, look, I have a very personal opinion to this, right? Like, and I think it's a general opinion amongst the community. Like, you put in your real score, right? And if you think that's a 110, I really hope you got that validated by a third party, because we do see a lot of negligence from the community, not on purpose. They're not on purpose saying that they're a 110, but they're not. So I think there's a couple thoughts here. I think if you're going to put a score in, make sure it's a validated score. I think that's number one. Don't just, pay a third party to come in and validate that score is in fact a 110 before you put it in. There's the conversation of, do I put a less than 110 score in there, whether it's a negative score or a positive score lower than 110, and is that a good or bad thing? I'm under the notion of, like, you want to put in your legit score, so you don't want to lie, but what if you put in a score of 40, which is a legit score, and a contractor in this early stages of CMMC world goes, ugh, right? We don't know, right? I don't know if I've necessarily given feedback to clients to not post. Your requirement is to post. You should have been compliant by now. But I think the answer is to always, work on getting compliant, work on keeping a realistic score and try and be as truthful as possible. Because again, especially, I think the biggest thing is, and a lot of this has to do with the interim years too, is, if you get assessed at a 110 and you get validated, or even beforehand, and you put in a 110 and you come to the maker and you see your C3PO and they go, you fail, you don't have that score. Some red flags are going to trigger in the system to say, but you've been putting in 110 for this amount of years, or in the interim years after an assessment, and now the C3PO is saying you're not perfect, right? So there's risk to that. And I again, I'm not a business owner or government, I'm not a government contractor business owner. I would just want to make sure, if I were you guys, make sure it's validated by a third party before you do anything, but you need to do something. Um, I could talk all day about that stuff, but I don't know if I specifically addressed your question. Maybe that was more of a personal feeling about it, but yeah, that's my two cents on it.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Alluvionic, we were certified CMMC level 2 in March of 2025. So we have been continuously complying, right? Over the last year, we have been ensuring, our compliance is, and our, affirmation official is this month we'll be going into SPRS and affirming that we remain compliant to the 110, right? That we did achieve last year. So part of my responsibility is to ensure that we remain compliant, right, across all 110 controls, 320 objectives, and that way I can show him before he puts his name, right, in a government system, that we are, no kidding, remain compliant. So really important, that annual requirement. So we talked about the 7019 and updating your score annually kind of goes away, but once you become certified, you also have the similar requirement to sustain that compliance and continuously comply. And a high-ranking official in your organization will be responsible for affirming, your continued compliance as well.
Yeah, I just want to double down on that. So again, just for everybody here, and I totally agree with that, is once you are C3PO certified, the journey does not end. You are required to self-assess every year, even the year of your, actual assessment 3 years later, right? So like, if I don't know who specifically is on this call, if it's IT managers or owners or things like that, but make sure before you sign your name on that government document, it is a legitimized score. Because again, you don't want your C3PAO 3 years later to go, looks like your entire environment has changed. You've been certifying against a 110. This is not good, right? And once you upload information into EMAS, we can't turn back. And so I would just kind of hit on that. Like, I think this bottom line, clause numbers changed, security expectations did not. Nothing has really changed. They're just numbering things differently. You still have all these requirements. If anything, the stringency is just going to be held a little bit harder, and they are now working their way down. This is an expectation, not a foresight of what's to come. It's here now. So yeah, I just want to double down, Bob, what you said, because we always hear people like, great, I'm assessed, I can kick my feet up. And I'm like, if anything, you just started the race. You just took off. So
yeah, that's such a great point. And I like the statement of clause numbers changed, security expectations did not. It's one thing I think that's really interesting about 7019 going away. 7019, I used to really describe it as self-awareness. It was, you're going to do assessment, you're going to see where you are as it compares to the requirements, and you're going to generate a legitimate real score. So as Eric indicated, it should be real. Negative is even okay. It doesn't matter. What is legitimate and real? And then Bobby talked about a POAM. Then you have to have a corresponding plan of action and milestones that's going to get you from that current state to the future state of perfect 110. What they're taking away here, I think, is partially to eliminate confusion, because we still hear people kind of assume that right now it's self-attestation. I don't really have to be ready yet. That's only when the third party assessor comes in. That's when I have to really be ready. I think they're saying, no, 7019 is out the window. What we're doing now is we're ready. 7021 is now directing this action. And this action is currently you are going to self-attest, partially because we just don't have the adequacy within the ecosystem to support all of the contractors that are going to require a third party. But it's just that next step in the process. But now they're expecting not just a baseline score, they're expecting you to truly have implemented these requirements and be getting in line to talk to folks like Eric and his team.
Yeah, I just want to add something I heard years ago in the ecosystem was they're like, yeah, but nobody's really talked to me about it. And somebody said, well, if they're not talking to you about it, maybe you're not that important in their supply chain. And I was like, whoa, that hits really deep, because it's like at the end of the day, business development activities relies on keeping these relationships. And if anything, CMMC, even though it's a compliance standard and it's there to protect the DID so information doesn't go out to foreign entities, it's a business development activity. When you go to bid, are you CMMC level 2 certified or not? Yes or no? Does EMAS show you are certified? Yes or no? It's not like ISO where it's like you get 5 more points, you are more competitive for this bid. So it's just real. That was a really interesting statement of like, yeah, okay, see, level, self-certification is gone. It didn't work anyway, right? But CMMC is, again, it is here, and there's not enough of us and too many of you guys. And I think it's realistic for them to have this rollout plan, but you need to be communicating now with your primes, with your contracts officers. Am I getting the flow down? Do I need to flow this down? What should I be prepared for? What do these clause numbers mean? Am I missing anything? Are you sure I'm handling CUI or not? What does this FOUO thing mean? Is that going, like, ask questions? Because if they're not talking to you, it's either because they don't have the time to deal with all their contractors, or they've really hit up contractors that they're relying on to do business in. So if you want to continue doing business with them, keep in front of them, and then keep in front of us to make sure that your timeline matches up with their timeline and these contract renewals or new contracts coming out. That is my number one feedback, is like, ask questions. You are in a position to ask questions so that you're in the best driver's seat to make buying decisions, which really this whole thing is. You're making a ton of different buying decisions, hopefully the right ones, to get compliant and stay compliant.
That's really good. It was actually one of my questions was how the audience here should talk to leadership and procurement teams about all of this. So there is a mix of people here represented in our audience today. And I think your message was really spot on with things that are important to the leadership team, to the procurement team, of what we should be thinking about regarding these shifts and CMMC in general. And Bobby, you brought up a really good point as well when you talk about that annual attestation once we're certified. Again, your responsibility within the organization is to ensure we stay compliant. But then in our case, our CFO is the person who's signing on the line. So there's that dialogue that needs to occur there to ensure that there's that open communication and that they're fully aware. Leadership knows exactly where we are in this process so that they can make the decisions that they need to make about moving things forward. I want to talk a little bit about this class deviation here. It's referenced here, which is really just a rulemaking process without going through formal rulemaking. That it enables changes like this. This isn't the first time with CMMC we've seen a class deviation. We saw earlier, as CMMC was just getting finalized, a shift with the NIST 800-171 framework. So NIST 800-171 revision 2 is the alignment for CMMC. However, revision 3 is published and effective. And just yesterday I was talking to a customer and they were asking for, they just wanted to read through information. And I Googled really quickly just to send them direct link to NIST. And when I pulled this up, it's NIST 800-171 revision 2 alpha to send. You get a huge exclamation point that this is not the law of the land anymore, that you need to look at revision 3. That creates a lot of confusion for organizations. Can we talk about that just for a second? What is the law of the land when it comes to CMMC?
Yeah, it's funny because it makes no sense, right? But it makes sense but it doesn't make any sense, right? So just remember, CMMC is based on NIST 800-171, right? There's NIST 853, CSF 800-218, right? There's all these NIST standards, and CMMC basically said we live and die on NIST 800-171, Rev 2A, right? Like Rev 2 is the law of the land right now. So when a C3PAO comes in, they're going to expect you to be CMMC level 2 revision 2 compliant. Now, if you want to jump ahead and start working towards Rev 3, feel free. But just remember, when you come meet your maker, I keep saying, I got to stop saying that. When you come meet your friendly C3PAO, who's going to be awesome, it's Rev 2. And that's the expectation. So we do have a lot of those discussions with folks that are jumping the gun, which is great. All power to you. Eventually, it will be Rev 3. It could be tomorrow. It could be in 500 years. We have no idea. I don't have an idea. Bobby, if you know, please let me know. But there is a timeline to get there. Right now, C3PAOs are expecting Rev 2, period.
Right. And Bobby, I know you've seen recently some customers that again, we talk about leadership and it's easy to see why they might think it could be Rev 3. So what are you seeing with regard to Rev 2 versus Rev 3 confusions?
Yeah, really a lot of confusion. So I believe don't quote me on, I want to say one of the CFRs or something, the original CFRs talked about compliance would be the most recent version of the NIST 800-171, right? Which created a lot of confusion initially. And then that's when I think the class deviation was generated to kind of just steer direction to Rev 2, right? So I know this says most updated version, but we don't want to ignore that. We want to ignore that. We want to focus on Rev 2. And it's only natural, although it's a very outdated framework, the ecosystem, the folks that have been working on this for some time, the organizations, the defense contractors that have been working on this, Rev 2 was the standard. To change course now, right now the focus is to get over 80,000 companies certified, right? That's the primary focus. So to change it now would be very problematic. I think the DoD, everyone recognizes Rev 3 is more up to date. There's a lot of cloud environment security controls. It's a much more modern framework, probably better overall. But to change it now is just going to slow down the goal of getting organizations, certified, right? So at some point there will have to be a line in the sand drawn, and whether we're going to transition to Rev 3. There's rumors that there's already a Rev 4 being drafted, so who knows, that maybe they will skip Rev 3 altogether. But again, very clear from the 7021 clause that Rev 2, 800-171 Rev 2 is the requirement and for certification. So as Eric said, good on you for implementing some of the controls for Rev 3 because they are good security practices for your organization. But when it comes for certification, you need to have your SSP everything needs to be, all your documentation needs to be aligned with revision 2, or you will most likely be turned away, right, during phase 1 of your assessment process.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Like I said, it was literally yesterday that I was looking at what you see when you search that. So it's very easy to see why it could be confusing, but it's very important to recognize your focus area is going to be revision 2, and it's to stay the course there until we're directed otherwise.
I'll add this, which is funny, real quick. And I don't know if this is what you guys experience too, but I get a lot of like, oh, we need CMMC 2 compliance, and I go, level 2, Rev 2, the old level 2, the new level 2, right? So like 1, 2, 3, level 1, 2, 3, Rev 1, Rev 2, Rev 3, old 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like there's so many different numbering systems. Again, this is all confusing. And I think one thing I try to have is empathy for the government contractor, as I know you guys do too, is this is cumbersome, this is confusing, this is scary, but if you have the right partners around you, you will be, there are companies that are compliant. There is an end goal. So again, I think what I hear out of all of this, all the confusion, all the shifting, all the what is the right path, you need to have the right person around you to help you make good buying decisions. Everything we have said leads back to that. I can't live more by that. Is the most successful audits we have seen have a really strong consultant that wraps around it, that all of these questions that are arising in industry are addressed by people like Bobby, where it's like, hey, what does this mean? Should I run? Is CMMC gone? It's like, no, let me explain this to you, right? Here's how to make good buying decisions. So again, I joked earlier, I'm definitely not as smart as I'm not a certified professional or an assessor, but I've been in this game for a while. And at the end of the day, this is a business decision. This is all business. So I think at the end of the day, wrap yourself around with a good consultant. So as these things shift, which they're inevitably going to shift once you get your assessment in those interim years, and that's why it's so important is to make sure you're up to date. Because what if something drops? You need to be prepared for that for your next assessment, and having the right resources around you lets you hit it early rather than being late to the game and potentially failing or being behind the eight ball. So just my 2 cents. I just thought that was funny as I was thinking about 1, 2, 3 and revs and all the craziness in CMMC.
We see the same thing where it's very confusing to say I need to implement 2.0 or level 2 or rev 2. There's a lot, and we live and breathe it every day, so we can speak it very clearly, but most of you have a day job that is not this, and therefore it gets really extra confusing as you try to wrap your head around what exactly you need to be focused on. I would love to just remind you to post some questions if you have any, and we'll kind of keep our discussion moving ahead as we look to monitor our Q&A area for any questions that might come up. One thing I'd love for us to spend just a little bit of time on as we kind of near the conclusion of our discussion today is just some maybe common mistakes that we're seeing. So some best practices that we want to share perhaps with this audience based on our experience as on the advisory consulting side when we're working with organizations, and also on the C3PAO side as you're engaging with those entities that are looking to take some action. What is rising to the top or standing out to you?
Yeah, so I'll give you my kind of top 3, right, from the assessor's point of view. Insufficient or incorrect external service provider definitions, or having an incorrect asset categorization, or not having the appropriate documentation that surrounds your external service providers, right? So an external service provider is a cloud provider, could be, I mean, think of like Salesforce and Microsoft, those are cloud providers. And managed service providers, think of like your IT provider that you might outsource IT work to. It is insufficiently documenting their responsibility and either putting them in scope when they shouldn't be, or removing them from scope when they shouldn't be, or not using the right form of them. Like we can have an entire discussions just about the improper execution of the external service providers that wrap around the organization seeking cert, and how they can destroy you. Truthfully, if you don't have the right partners, the right IT provider, the right cloud provider around you, and they're not quote unquote compliant for what's applicable to them, it affects your audit as a whole, because it's all CMMC is all about responsibility. So if you're like, that's not me, I use ABC cloud provider for that, then the C3PO is going to go, great, see, ABC cloud provider, show me how you meet these controls, document it, prove it to me. X, Y, and the cap will show like if we need to interview someone or review evidence or look at something. So that is the number one thing we see, is just insufficient documentation or just care as it relates to external service providers and the asset categorization of service providers, and then just scope. So scope and ESPs, if you're unable, one of the biggest things I ask people when I start to qualify a scope of a client, I go, do you print? Well, maybe. Well, that's a yes, right? If you maybe print, then I'm going to assume that you're printing, and the assessor is going to assume you're printing. It's a yes or a no. And if it's a yes, better have things locked down. And if it's a no, we better not find out you're printing, right? Because, at the end of the day, we can only assess, you're only going to assess the scope of the environment that you tell us. Like a Control Case, right? We're a huge company. We have an enclave that we've assessed. So when we got assessed, they only looked at that big black box around our enclave. Our entire corporate infrastructure is out of scope. There's a way to do that. Some companies can't do that. There's not one right way to do CMMC. So when you come to me as the auditor, come prepared with this is my scope. It's either this or this, and here's what is in scope, and here's what is out of scope. And I really only want to focus on what's in scope. And that is, I would say that drives people in that phase one that Bobby talked about to not be ready. And it's in the assessor's best interest, and it's in your best interest for the assessor to say, hey, look, we're kind of worried you're going to fail. We recommend not moving forward with the assessment right now and going to get help. There's kind of a safeguard in place for the organization seeking cert that the assessor could say, look, you can continue with this, but I'm a little nervous that you're going to fail. And then that phase one, it's usually by those two things that I've mentioned before, is the top three things that we see causing those issues almost every time.
Awesome. Bobby, you have any things you'd like to share?
Yeah, so a couple. So piggybacking off Eric, I think the scoping is critical. You know, if you haven't reviewed the CMMC level 1 or level 2, primary level 2, because you're going to be require a sort of third-party certification. The CMMC level 2 scoping guide, right? It's a free resource available out there on the DoD CIO website. Basically, the CMMC program for the Department of Defense, Department of War. There's free resources out there, but that document in particular is critical, right? Because as Eric said, you need to be able to determine the scope of your environment initially. It's critical before you start applying security controls, right, everywhere. So especially if you're going to have a reduced scope, a lot of small businesses that we support do have the ability to have a reduced scope. So that's really critical to be able to do that. That's something we do in all of our projects. And then kind of starting from two ends of the spectrum, we sometimes work with clients who are just starting with CMMC, so we find generally lots of deficiencies. One of them, namely, is storing CUI in non-FedRAMP, authorized or moderate equivalent cloud service providers. So just like the Microsoft Commercial Cloud, it's not going to be authorized, right, to store CUI there. Certainly going to get recognized at assessment. So that's something that we sometimes see with small businesses who just don't know, right? They don't know that there are FedRAMP requirements. So that's kind of why we meet with them early on in their journey, and we can help them. But that if they're going to continue to store in the cloud. And then from a more mature companies, we're starting to see a lot of companies now that have been working on CMMC for a while, and they're ready, right? They're ready to call Eric and Control Case and get that assessment scheduled, but they want us to do like a readiness review of all their so they have all their documentation, all their evidence, and we're starting to see where their system security plan is not adequate and sufficient, right? So in some cases, not written even to the objective level, right? So they have really good quality responses, but there's some templates out there, in my opinion, that are poor because they are I don't know the title of them, but one that I've seen in particular, I think it's a NIST 800-171 template, and it's got everything you need for a system security plan, but it's not broken out to the objective level. So, and I've seen some clients that adopt that, and again, their responses, they've got some good stuff in there, but it's not to the objective level, which again is going to be certainly kicked back by the C3PO during phase one. So that's something to look at. And then finally, if you're working with an external service provider, like some of these FedRAMP cloud service providers or an IT managed service provider, and they are taking care of, you're delegating some of the compliance to them, then they must provide you either a customer or shared responsibility matrix, because that's going to be evidence that's also going to be requested by the C3PO as well. So those are critical things or noteworthy things that I've seen recently.
Yeah, I just want to tag on real quick because I know we're coming close to time. That objective level, to those in community, it sounds like, well, what do you mean you're not going down to the objective level? That is the most important thing is, if the control says to clean your room and your room is clean, but you forget, but the objective says to put your shoes away and wash your windows and make your bed. If you washed your windows and put your shoes away, but you forgot to make your bed, your room is not clean. And that is why CMMC is so prescriptive. And we see it all the time where people are using templates and GRC tools that maybe don't go down to the objective level. That should be your starting point, is how do we meet these objectives? How do we document these objectives? I could not agree with you more. That was the third. I realized I didn't give 3 points. That was my third point. You took the words right out of my mouth, Bobby, because that is absolutely an issue we see with a ton of assessments.
Yeah. Well, good. You guys were synced there. You had a very similar set of challenges that you've seen that is pretty reflective of the ecosystem out there. We did get a question from the audience about CUI. So in this case, what if you don't handle CUI? Either it's being handled by your prime, or it's just simply not being flowed down to you directly. So the question I think is just, maybe what is your scope within CMMC if you're not handling CUI?
This is a very interesting discussion, because I think I have two distinct answers, and I'm very curious from a CCP's perspective how you would handle this. But if you could prove you are not handling CUI and you are not in scope of that, and you are not storing, processing, or transmitting that, you are only held to level 1 requirements. You are handling FCI. You only need to meet the 17 control families and self-assess and hold a level 1 cert. However, we are absolutely seeing prime contractors say, I don't care that you don't handle CUI. If you want to work with me, you need to be prepared to potentially handle CUI, and I'm going to need you to be level 2 certified. Right, wrong, or indifferent, illegal or not illegal, or crazy or not crazy. I'm seeing things of people coming to me saying, I never handle CUI, but now I'm subject to it. It's what it sounds like, right? So it goes all the way back to what I said. Communicate with your primes, because if they're flowing it down, you need to be prepared for it and handle it appropriately. If they're not, you need to make sure of that. And if they don't care and they're requiring it, you need to make sure of that. So that's my 2 cents. Bobby, where's your head at with that?
Yeah, I agree. It all starts with the contract clauses, right? So what's being flowed down to you? So if you have a 7012 clause, DFARS 7012 clause being flowed down to you, then you have the responsibility to safeguard CUI, whether you have historically been receiving it or not. Like as you said, they could, at any point, they could contractually, they could start sending that to you, flowing that down to you. So therefore, your environment must be, compliant to process, store, and transmit it. So it's communication, certainly. If you've been working with a prime contractor for X number of years, you've never had CUI, now's the time to probably communicate with that is, do I need this 7021 clause to be in my, because that's what's going to cost you money, right, to get certified. And maybe it was always been in there just because, right? Just because it's been in there, there was no additional cost to the small business. That's where that dialogue is really important. But then again, they reserve the right to keep that clause in there. So I think if that 7012 most likely is going to most likely turn into a 7021 clause on future contracts. So now would be the time to address that requirement. But I think if it's in the clause, you most likely are going to have to comply.
I know we're wrapping up, so I just want to share, we will send this out as an after, but how you can get in touch with Eric. We do have his contact information up here on the screen. Anything else you want to mention, Eric?
No, I'll just leave you guys with this, right? All C3POs are booking out in advance. So if you have scope identified, but you have a long road to being ready, you should be communicating with C3PAOs and locking into their calendar early, and then working on getting ready and keeping that communication channel open with your C3PAO. So if you know, I'm in an enclave, I'm in an enterprise, I have X amount of cloud providers, but you're nowhere close to being ready, most are booking in advance. So start having those discussions now to plan for the future. That would be my only word of advice from a C3PAO.
Right. Thank you so much, Bobby. Same. Here's Bobby's contact information. Any word of advice to leave?
Yeah, just if it can feel overwhelming. So depending on where you are in your journey, there's always a plan. There's a path to compliance, whether it's an enclave or full enterprise across the entire company. So happy to have a conversation and kind of see what, how we could help you right in your readiness journey. So yeah, the best of luck out there.
Yes, thank you so much. We are at time. I did see one more question pop in just about potential for level 3, and we'll reach back out to you to be sure we get that answered. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.
Bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.